morning. Can you hear me okay? Good morning and welcome to the Humanist Club in the Villages. I'm Bo Goldsmith, and I'm certainly happy to see you all here today. Is there anyone new here today that has not been to one of these meetings before? Hi, welcome. If you decide that you'd like to receive our weekly email notices about coming speakers and topics, please provide your email address at on the table at the end of the room, and we'll be happy to add you to the list. This is a very open-minded group. Our best short definition of humanism that I have heard comes from Kurt Vonnegut, who was the president of the American Humanist Association in the mid-1990s, and he defined humanism as the essence of humanism is trying to behave decently without expectation of reward or punishment after you're dead. And I like that. We typically have, for those of you that are new, meetings on the first and third Sundays at this time, at this location, for speaker meetings, which a speaker is given an uninterrupted period of time to make a presentation, and then we have what we hope will be a spirited question and answer session at the end of the presentation. The second Sunday of the month is a different format, with a small group table format that is run with an iron fist by Pam, and it's designed to produce more conversation amongst folks than can be the case when you have a large group gathering and presentation. Pam, do you want to tell us about the meeting next week?
Next week, I'm going to give a short talk. We just do short talks because it's more about discussion on the really exciting success that they're having with psilocybin, a psychedelic, for therapy, in particular for trauma and for PTSD. And then wherever it goes from there.
And I intend to be there and impress her with regard to the evidentiary basis for those claims.
Okay.
All right. Our next speaker meeting will be on the 20th, when Larry Martin will be speaking, and we'll be talking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflicts before and after October of last year. The Freethinkers Club, his next meeting is on October 10th. I see that Bud's here. Do you want to tell us what that one's going to be?
Mark Welton will be the speaker, and the topic is the rule of law, principles, and challenges. So he'll be talking about why the rule of law is so important to a functioning democracy, and why it's so important if you want to have a prosperous economy.
Thank you, Bud. Mark is a great speaker, and his presentations are always terrific. We have a couple of announcements. Pam, you want to make an announcement with regard to...
You can start.
She's already getting back at me about my claim for next week. We, as a club, do not have dues, but we do request donations to cover the cost of coffee, snacks, and incidental club expenses, and there's a jar in the back for that purpose. You should understand that our expenses do not include honoraria for either the speaker or the host. Sorry I didn't tell you about that before. Okay.
At the for their generosity when we brought up several things that we've been having to pay for. I also am hoping if people be a little more generous, that we can afford to pay for the lunch for speakers that put in a 2-hour round trip to get here. For the work we take them out to lunch, and hopefully the club can pay their lunch.
Just to make it clarify, that's for, basically, these would be invited speakers from a distance outside the villages that come in. We ain't gonna pay them honoraria either.
No.
Which, but we'd like to take them to lunch.
And if we can get a little more in donations, I would love to upgrade the 24-cent an item cookies that we have to something more appropriate, like little bagels and cream cheese or donuts. It is, after all, morning, but we're on a very tight budget so far. I also want to mention that I put out a comment jar, and we're interested in feedback. Talks you particularly like or don't like, and why.
Well, some of us are anyway.
Ideas, yeah. Yeah, so criticisms, compliments, anything you would like to share with the board. So that jar is right back on that table, and that's all. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Pam. Any other announcements? I believe Mike has an announcement that he'd like to make. Here.
You can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good teacher.
That's okay, I know they can hear me. I live in, I'm presenting a workshop called the 25 Greatest Women in History. And we include several of the ladies here. And so that's a good one. The title explains itself. And I'm doing that where I live. I live at an assisted living center. It said, it borders the villages. It's Heathstone Assisted Living Center. And it's October 15th at 4:30. October 15th at 4:30. So you'll be getting an email. There's a limited number of people that we can accept, so look for the email. The first 10 people that respond will get a ticket to that event. So October 15th, 4:30.
October 15th, 4:30, and they don't have to go to Ticketmaster, right?
No.
Okay, all right. Great. All right. Well, today we're fortunate to have John Griffin talking to us about the universal basic income. But before I give John the microphone, I want to share with you something that I needed recently. I just recently had my 80th birthday. And at the time that we were celebrating that, a very old friend of Jane, my wife, and myself, a friend of over 55 years, who just turned 90 herself, imparted the following bit of wisdom for the aged to me. She said, "Bo, inside every old person, there still remains a young person who is asking, what the hell happened?" I can relate to that. John is a long time, I won't say graduate, but resident and worker in Silicon Valley, working on information technology with regard to coding and chips. And he has assured me, despite that background, that the following presentation was not entirely constructed by AI, nor is the presenter an avatar.
comments to explain the format that I want to use. And since I'm not good at all at memorizing narrative, I'm just going to sit down at my computer and read those comments to you. After I put on the glasses that allow me to see the computer screen. Today, I will give you an unconventional argument for universal basic income, or UBI for short. I will tell you what a UBI is, why we need it so badly, and how we can overcome all reasonable objections to it. But first, I would like to explain why I'm doing this. I gave my first public presentation on this subject over 8 years ago. But more recently, I realized that my passion for this subject is also motivated by fear. There are political forces gathering in this country, and indeed around the world, that I fear will throw our society into chaos. My goal is to convince as many people as I can that such fear is justified, and that a universal basic income is critically necessary to prevent that chaos. However, I also realize these last 8 years have given me plenty of time to arrange my thoughts on this subject and answer any questions that I encountered. To me, all of the ducks are in a row. But I must acknowledge that most of my audience has not been through that process. To most of you, these ideas will indeed be unconventional. So, how can I convince you all that the ducks are indeed in a row without presenting hours of data and addressing the endless list of questions that I had to answer for myself? If I did that, I would lose my audience. If I didn't do that, I would fail to convince those who have every right to be skeptical. Today, I will attempt to have it both ways. To convince the skeptics without burying my audience in data. To that end, most of today's presentation will be in the form of a YouTube video that I have prepared. I believe that video offers the following advantages. Number one, the YouTube video can be made available to a wide audience. Number two, the YouTube video has a description section that can contain clickable pointers to additional material. That feature enabled me to limit today's video to an overview of main ideas. I then created other short videos to offer more detail in bite-sized portions. Any viewer who desires more detail can go to YouTube and click on those links. Number three, since this is a controversial subject, I wanted to choose my words carefully and present them in a precise manner. In a video, I can do that. Number four, many audience members appreciate having subtitles to help them understand the speaker. Today's video will present those. And number five, YouTube video can have section headings that enable the viewer to go directly to relevant material. I will also add that I often get requests for copies of material from my presentations. Since I have uploaded this video to YouTube, I can satisfy such requests by simply providing a pointer to it. Following the video, there will be the opportunity for questions and comments. I'm always looking for the most efficient ways to present this material. Therefore, I am very much interested in what you, the audience, think about this presentation format. I also wish to emphasize that these videos are not clickbait. I'm well aware that many YouTube content creators post videos simply to make money whenever advertising is displayed with their videos. I am not one of them. And trust me, if my intent was to make money, I would definitely choose a different topic. I do not expect these videos to qualify for even 1 penny of compensation. I also apologize in advance for any advertising that may interrupt my online videos. I have no control over that. It is just an annoying price we pay for the opportunity to post videos online at little or no cost. And having said that, I will start the video as soon as I can find the cursor. Here we go. My name is justify a UBI and easily overcome all reasonable objections to it. And then you will see how we can pay for a UBI without deficit spending, without causing inflation, and this is the part that libertarians should love. How we can pay for it without taking even 1 penny of anyone's hard-earned money. And finally, I will tell you how we can build political support for a UBI and convince our representatives to enact it. So let's start at the top with the definition. The universal basic income is a regularly scheduled cash payment made to all adult citizens of a country, regardless of the recipient's wealth, income, or employment status. Of course, this definition generates a number of questions, and we could devote an entire video to a more detailed discussion of the ideas behind this definition. In fact, I have created a separate video to do just that. The title of that video is shown below, and if you are watching on a computer or smartphone, a pointer to that video is pinned above the comments section. In this video, I will address 4 of the obvious questions. Number 1, how much will be paid? It is widely accepted that a universal basic income should at least be equal to the nation's poverty threshold for an individual adult. In the U.S., that threshold is set by the Census Bureau, and for the year 2022, stood at $1,269 per month. Number 2, why is our UBI provided only to citizens? The answer is straightforward. Since countries vary widely in the level of their per capita GDP, a basic income in the United States will likely be higher than in most other countries. Our payments are restricted to citizens in order to discourage immigration by those who simply wish to receive our higher payment. Number 3, why is our UBI provided only to adults? While we certainly want children to benefit from their share of society's wealth, we don't wish to encourage people to have children just to receive more money. Society should have a thorough discussion of how children can be helped by a basic income. For now, however, I will just suggest that a reasonable plan is to provide half of an adult share for each child, and to give that share to groups such as daycare centers, schools, and meal programs that will help parents with the care and education of children. Number 4, why do the wealthy receive a basic income? Surely they don't need it. The answer to this question is better understood after I have explained how we will justify the UBI. I will offer the answer at that point. So, why do I believe it is so important to implement the universal basic income? Reason number 1, I am more convinced than ever that it would eliminate much of our country's current social and political polarization. I believe that much of that polarization is caused by the anger and desperation felt by so many as it becomes increasingly difficult to support themselves and their families, and as they watch income and wealth inequality soar to levels that are not only unjustifiable, but that are simply obscene. It is usually at this point that I would insert charts and other evidence to support my claims about inequality. However, to maintain focus on the main ideas of this presentation, I will instead just offer the reference shown at the bottom. It points to another video containing that material. And the second reason it is important to implement a UBI is that I am more worried than ever that failure to address that polarization will tear our country apart. I further believe that many of those who have been left behind by our economy are convinced that their problems are not being addressed by mainstream politicians in any party. That situation manifests itself in the desire of many to simply tear down our current political system and worry later about what the replacement will be. I fear the people may ultimately decide to reject the messiness of democracy and just go with a strongman leader someone who will promise to get things done quickly. If we reach that point, the country that most of us believe in and wish to live in will be gone. Furthermore, I believe that distributing wealth more equitably through a universal basic income is the only effective solution to this problem. In other words, I believe that ultimately we have only two choices. We either implement the UBI or watch while our society is destroyed. So, if we need a UBI so badly, why don't we already have it? People have talked about universal basic income for decades, and historical references go back centuries. In the U.S. alone, more than 150 basic income pilot programs have been completed or are still running. These pilot programs show overwhelmingly positive results. They show the obvious. When the poor have more money, they spend it wisely, and their lives improve. Highlighting these positive results has become the conventional way to promote UBI. Advocates assume that if we just run enough pilot programs, the public will be impressed by the results, and our politicians will then vote for it. Unfortunately, that is just not working. Why is that? Don't the voters see the good that comes from these pilot programs? Of course they do. But these pilot programs offer them no reason to believe that a UBI is anything but a handout or just more welfare. This dislike of welfare and handouts comes from long-held attitudes and beliefs. We live in a country with a strong work ethic. Many of us believe that paid work is the only honorable and legitimate way to receive income. We also vigorously reject the idea that one person's hard-earned income should be taken from him and given to those who we believe are working less hard or not at all. And then we run into the biggest objection of all, that a UBI will simply cost too much and will explode our national debt. We will examine all of these objections. But let's start with how much will a UBI cost every year? The detailed answer to that question can be found in the video shown at the bottom. The short answer is based on two assumptions. Number one, that a UBI should raise all adult citizens above the country's official poverty threshold. And number two, that a UBI should provide an amount equal to half of the adult payment for the benefit of each citizen under the age of 18. The total of those two amounts would have been $4.2 trillion in the year 2022. Now let's face it, $4.2 trillion is definitely a lot of money. In fact, it was 16.3%, nearly 1/6 of U.S. GDP in the year 2022. Please keep that percentage in mind, because our unconventional argument for universal basic income will not only show how we can easily afford that amount, it will also show how we can overcome all other objections. So, let's begin our examination of that unconventional argument by looking at how value is created in a modern economy. Consider this diagram. It shows the real per capita U.S. gross domestic product, or GDP, for the period from 1900 to 2000. We see that real economic output per person in the United States, as measured in constant 2012 dollars, grew from approximately $6,300 in the year 1900 to over $46,000 in the year 2000. This is more than a seven-fold inflation-adjusted increase over the course of the 20th century. How did we achieve this increase? Are we all working 7 times harder or longer than we did in 1900? Of course not. In fact, there is ample evidence to show that the average worker in the year 1900 actually worked about 20 hours per week longer than their counterpart in the year 2000. Remember, the 40-hour work week did not become official in the U.S. until 1940. The simple truth is that we achieved that extra output by taking advantage of the accumulated knowledge, technology, and value of those things can be seen if we consider what today's economy would be like without the items on this list. All of these items came into prominence in the 20th century and contributed immensely to the increase in our productivity. For the same amount of individual effort, we enjoy at least a 7-fold increase in output per person. And that does not even consider the increases due to advances in all of the centuries prior to the year 1900. In his last public lecture in the year 2000, Herbert Simon, an award-winning computer scientist and Nobel laureate in economics, said the following, and I have summarized his actual quote for conciseness. Consider the income that you now receive as a member of American society, and compare it with the income that you would receive if you were an equally hardworking member of a third world nation. For most of us, the difference between the two incomes would be at least 10 to 1. Therefore, if we are very generous with ourselves, I suppose we might claim that we earned as much as 1/5 of the income we receive. The rest is patrimony associated with being a member of an enormously productive social system which has bestowed upon us this generous allotment of unearned income. I have added the capital letters and the red color to the word unearned for emphasis. In other words, this quote says that over 80% of our economic output is due to the fact that society's accumulated knowledge and technology and other infrastructure creates value on its own. Only the remaining 20% or less of our output can be attributed to the efforts of individual people. Another quote illustrates this same idea. American businessman, investor, and billionaire Nick Hanauer said the following in one of his TED Talks. If I had been born somewhere else, not here in the United States, then all of my efforts might very well have resulted in nothing more than me being just some dude standing barefoot beside a dirt road selling fruit. This evidence and these quotes lead to a straightforward conclusion. In a developed country, society's accumulated knowledge and technology and other infrastructure, which I will henceforth refer to as our societal heritage, creates far more economic output than all of our personal efforts are responsible for. But then that statement raises a fundamental question. In a world in which over 80% of our output is not due to the efforts of any person, who is the rightful owner of that output? Fortunately, the answer to that question is straightforward. That output simply belongs to those who own that highly productive knowledge, technology, and infrastructure. Of course, recently developed knowledge and technology may still be covered by patents that grant ownership to individuals and corporations. However, the vast majority of our societal heritage has long ago passed into the public domain. In other words, we own. Every citizen owns an equal share by simple inheritance. Now, when technology is under patent protection, the patent owner has a right to charge a royalty whenever that technology is used. Therefore, it follows directly that when private companies use our publicly owned societal heritage, society has every right to charge a royalty or user fee when it is used. And since that public domain property is responsible for over 80% of our GDP, there is more than enough to cover the mere 16.3% of GDP needed for a universal basic income. And there you have it. This is called the technological inheritance argument for a universal basic income. If you take only one idea from this presentation, let it be this one. The value created by our public domain knowledge, technology, and infrastructure, our societal heritage, inherit things, that hardly seems to matter, right? Well, when 80% of GDP is ours by inheritance, it definitely matters now. I should point out that the technological inheritance argument is by no means original with me. It appears in this 2016 article by Professor Gar L. Hurwitz. I highly recommend that article as an introduction to this idea. Once you are familiar with this idea, you will recognize that it also appeared over 200 years ago in one of my favorite quotes from Thomas Paine. All accumulation, therefore, of personal property beyond what a man's own hands produce is derived to him by living in society, and he owes on every principle of justice, of gratitude, and of civilization a part of that accumulation back again to society from whence the whole came. Now, at this point, we are finally in a position to answer the question of why the wealthy would receive a basic income even though they don't need it. The answer is straightforward. Basic income is the rightful inheritance of all citizens. Receiving it is not and should not be dependent on your financial status. However, the UBI is taxable, and those with incomes well above the basic level could be asked to give some of it back in taxes. Since the technological inheritance argument shows that over 80% of our GDP is due to our publicly owned societal heritage, the 16.3% needed for a UBI would easily be covered by existing revenue. For that simple reason, we see how we can pay for a UBI without deficit spending, and therefore without the inflation that often results from deficit spending. And when we charge for the use of our societal heritage, we are not, I repeat, not taking even 1 penny of anyone's hard-earned money. Private entrepreneurs and investors did not earn that money. Our societal heritage earned it. Now, before I go any further, I should briefly address a question that often occurs to many at this point. If we, the people, own 80+% of the economy's means of production, isn't that just socialism? That is a fair question, and the short answer is simply no. Unlike the situation in actual socialist countries, entrepreneurs and their investors are still free to own and operate their companies in any legal manner that maximizes their profits. However, they now need to pay for their use of our societal heritage, just like they pay any other supplier. A long answer requires more time than is available in this format. Therefore, I refer interested viewers to the video shown at the bottom. So, why aren't we already receiving these royalty payments and using them for a UBI? In other words, how did we arrive at the current situation in which it is simply assumed that our public domain property, our societal heritage, can be used by anyone and at no charge? I believe that happened by default for the following reasons. Number one, for most of history, economic output was created primarily by human labor. The part due to our societal heritage was often just too small to warrant the effort needed to consider it separately. While that heritage contributes a far larger share today, we simply have not yet chosen to rethink this relationship. Number two, enterprises that used our societal heritage often needed our labor. Since the resulting jobs paid wages that enabled us to claim a share of economic output, those jobs could be considered a form of payment for the use of our heritage. And last but not least, when enterprises receive considerable value contend, however, that in today's economy, the amount of unpaid use of our societal heritage has reached unacceptable levels. After all, if at least 80% of our GDP is due to that heritage, then item number 1 is obviously no longer true. As for item number 2, automation and artificial intelligence have already disrupted the creation of the type of jobs that used to offer a living wage for everyone who needed work. For more evidence on that subject, I suggest the video shown at the bottom of this slide. And as for item number 3, it is simply well past time to push back and insist on proper payment for the use of our public domain property. Of course, there are many more aspects of this subject that can be explored. However, to keep this video to a reasonable length, I will just briefly touch on 3 of the more important bits. Number 1, who in particular will be paying for our UBI and how much will they be charged? The long answer can be found in the video shown at the bottom. The short answer is that anyone who uses our societal heritage in the creation of commercial value will pay in proportion to the value they receive from that use. One way to determine the value they receive is to look at that producer's revenue per employee. The higher that number, the more value they are receiving from the efficiencies of modern technology. Number 2, if business owners are paying for our UBI, how will that affect their desire and motivation to run a business? This question is very important. We, as a society, need to acknowledge that our economy is run by a relatively small number of entrepreneurs and investors. The rest of us are just their employees or customers. If these business owners are not properly motivated to do what they do so well, the rest of us won't have the 80% that we claim is ours. So, how can we motivate these hardworking business owners? We can start by letting them keep all of the roughly 20% of economic output that is a direct result of their efforts. Next, we should be willing to let them keep enough of the remaining 80% to properly motivate them. How much they keep should be thoroughly debated. However, let us propose that they keep another 20%. If slightly less than 20% is needed for a universal basic income, then we would still have over 40% of GDP for other purposes. A third question is, what will life be like in a world with a UBI? This question could also fill an entire video on its own, and that video is shown below. At this time, I will briefly touch on some of the main ideas. First and foremost, poverty would be a thing of the past, simply because everyone would receive an income above the country's official poverty threshold. We would also have an increased sense of community. When all citizens share a claim to our societal heritage, there would be a sense that we are all equal in that regard. In addition, the increased financial freedom provided by a regular income would give people the power to say no. No to undesirable jobs. No to being trapped in an undesirable relationship because of financial dependence on another person. In addition, a regular income would enable people to take chances and to explore business opportunities that might otherwise be out of reach. In a world with a UBI, we will have a good reason to celebrate advances in automation and AI. The increases in productivity resulting from such advances would ultimately raise our universal basic income to a universal high income. We will also have more opportunity to find meaning and purpose in our lives outside of conventional work. While some fortunate souls do find meaning and purpose in their work and get paid to do it, the majority of us go to work simply to have a source of income. Most of us would rather be pursuing our passions and spending our time taking better care of ourselves and our families. A world with a universal basic income would increase those opportunities. In summary, the universal basic income will explicitly acknowledge who truly owns most of the output of our economy. It will eliminate poverty overnight by raising everyone above the the official poverty threshold. It will go a long way toward eliminating unjustified income and wealth inequality. And most importantly, it will defuse many of the grievances and much of the desperation that prompts people to favor populist politicians. So, with all of these goals in mind, we must now ask, how can we build political support for a UBI and convince our representatives to enact it? Clearly, the universal basic income, funded in the proposed manner, would be a major change to the status quo, and it would encounter significant resistance from those who currently enjoy putting far more than their rightful share into their own pockets. So, first step toward building the political support needed for a UBI is to recognize that that support must come from the bottom, because those at the top are perfectly happy with the status quo. So, here's how we build that bottom-up support. We start by recognizing that most people are not aware of the following: that at least 80% of GDP in a modern economy belongs to them by simple birthright, and that a good portion of that 80+% is currently being pocketed by those who use our societal heritage without properly paying for it. This has been going on for decades and has resulted in huge and unjustifiable levels of income and wealth inequality. And finally, that those who currently use our societal heritage are happy to rely on our ignorance to keep us from demanding our rightful share. So, how do we overcome that ignorance? We start by creating an education program to achieve the following results. Number one, the realization that universal basic income is not welfare or charity or handout at all. It is a birthright. This would finally eliminate the stigma often associated with receiving money from non-work sources. The realization that for decades, much of our rightful share of GDP has been pocketed, actually stolen, by undeserving people. A process that has resulted in huge and unjustifiable levels of wealth and income inequality. And a third and very important result of this education process will be outrage. Yes, outrage. Outrage that this theft has gone unchecked for decades. Such outrage will be crucial to achieving a universal basic income, because those that benefit from the status quo will spare no expense in their attempts to hang on to their windfall of unearned income. We must be angry enough to elevate this issue to the top of our political priorities so that we reject any politician who disagrees. This brings us to the end of our unconventional argument for universal basic income. I thank you for your attention to this critically important topic.
John, thank you so much, for, a really provocative topic. One of the things that I like, most of you are familiar with the trends, that you were talking about, but when I was preparing another talk, I discovered a few numbers that gave me an idea of the current magnitude of the problem of wealth inequality in this country and the pattern that's been associated with it. When I graduated from medical school in 1970, the top 1% of the economic population had between 7 and 8% of the total wealth in the country. In 2022, the top 1% had almost 35% of the wealth in this country. And the top 10%, which includes a large majority, I suspect, of the people here, had over 80% of the total wealth in the country. This is a return to, I think, although to getting the numbers to register is hard, the robber baron age of the late 19th century, which produced its own pattern of rebellion leading to labor unions and the like, in the aftermath of the Great Depression. I think we're in a similar situation now, and it's not surprising to me that this growing, you showed the average income going up, but that was an average. That didn't have to do with the way it was distributed.
Per capita.
But yeah, exactly. It was per capita as opposed. When you adjust for inflation, the median, half on one side, half on the other, wage in 1970 was higher than the median wage in 2022. Okay? No wonder a lot of people are mad and say this system is not working for me. And that's kind of the economic basis for the justification. Okay. Thank you for indulging me. Let's have some comments. Bill.
Well, I certainly learned some new things there, and the most inspiring thing, amazing, is that all we have to do is give up that 20%. We can rely on the 80% that we're all entitled to, and nobody will have to work, right? Just get by on that 80%. Nobody has to work.
Well, it all depends if you want a Yugo or a Mercedes.
Yeah. A lot of people want more than a basic income, so yeah. There's very little evidence in all these pilot programs that people will actually quit working if they can find a job.
Thank you for your presentation. I've attended a lot of presentations here and other discussion groups, and I think they would be much more interesting and much more useful if you put on a program where both sides of an issue are given. I'm not criticizing any use of it, but if there were a conference speaker giving the arguments the other way, we would all get a lot out of that. And I find that to be common with a lot of discussion.
Thank you for that. In terms of the mechanics of getting the money to pay for this universal basic income, you said we need like 16% or so of GDP in order to pay for that, or something less than 20%. In terms of the mechanics of how getting that money, questions are, should be based upon the per capita revenue. So one individual with very few employees pays a much higher than 20% tax. Someone with a lot of employees reduces his tax to much less. What are the mechanics of collecting the money?
Well, it would be, I believe, a lot simpler than the current tax system. But yes, your first point is, it should be based on what value companies are receiving from our societal heritage, our accumulated knowledge and technology. And a good indication of that is simply what amount of revenue are they receiving per employee. They can make a lot of money with few employees, and I think it's fairly obvious that they are taking full advantage of our knowledge and technology.
I thought it was really interesting take on things and useful. The one thing that maybe you just feel is necessary to get people to take action is the use of the word stealing, which I think means taking illegally, and I don't think that the entrepreneurs are stealing. They're operating within a system. But again, I understand you want people to get all riled up. That's how change happens.
I used the word theft at the end, and that's strong language, but I wanted to emphasize that I believe in the end that's actually what it is, whether it's, I don't believe it's due to malice, but the system simply allows it at this point.
enjoyed your presentation. Most people who advocate for universal basic income now don't use your argument as the reason. They use practicality down the road. A lot of economists and other experts are concerned that as technology becomes even more capable, we won't need people anymore for a lot of the jobs. And that's especially true with artificial intelligence and the uncertainty about how that's going to change our society. As more and more jobs get phased out by technology, there's a real question of how many jobs will be needed for people. And if society doesn't, if you don't need people in our economy for a lot of, if you don't need enough people so that there's a huge portion of the population that can't find work, then you're going to have some way for those people to live. And the idea of having everyone earn their living by their work won't work. And so that's a rationale for a large-scale provision of income, and the universal basic income is the one that usually is used. So that's another major reason why others are advocating for a basic income.
Comment? Thank you, Ed. Fix it, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck, for the presentation. There is a book I just finished reading that addresses some of the issues that you brought up, and that is, the book is entitled Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond, and it's I'll have to say it's a very short book. It's less than 200 pages long, but it does address universal basic income, and of course it addresses poverty, which is very critical in this day and age. The other thing, is there an example that you could sort of describe that happened here in the U.S. and this universal basic income and how they financed it?
Well, as our presentation mentioned, there have been over 150 pilot programs. They were oftentimes financed by private money, just on an experimental basis, and they weren't really universal in the sense that they directed that money toward people who needed it the most. But it was done to determine what people do with the money and whether they spend it wisely and how they fare afterwards. And the results are overwhelmingly positive. My point is that we don't even need to use those positive results as a reason to have universal basic income. It's more fundamental than that. We have inherited the universal basic income regardless of how we'll use it. So even though there's evidence that we'll use it well, that's, in my mind, essentially irrelevant.
It occurred to me that there's an argument. It occurred to me that there's an argument that you left out. Okay, we don't like to talk about anything that involves something like universal basic income because it's the right thing to do. Because that's not something that's going to sell to the politicians. But on the economic side, I wonder if any study has been done, or if you've seen anything that relates the direct and indirect costs to our society of poverty. And how much of a trade-off, how much would we save on the cost of poverty by providing this basic income to people?
Absolutely, yes, that is an excellent point.
Good point.
That is often included in these studies of these pilot programs. Just how much
perspective of health care, this is a cogent argument. And I won't say more except that yes, you would save money if you didn't have poverty on health care in this country. That's right.
I must say, first of all, I disagree with both your premise and your conclusion profoundly. The fact that I do so angrily probably means there's some merit to it. But I did, without getting into that, probably give the alternative presentation off the top of my head, but rather than try to take up the rest of the time with that, let me just point out that there is truly an inherited debt called national debt. And while I don't buy the premise that there's an inherited income source or wealth, there is certainly an inherited debt. I'd like to hear what your comment on that would be.
Well, can I ask you first, what's your reservation about buying the idea that we have this inherited, we have inherited the ownership of this knowledge and technology?
Well, like I said, I could give a whole kind of presentation, but two things briefly. One is everybody uses it, even those who don't get any universal basic income are going to use it. They're going to use the roads and the infrastructure and the television and the computers and the internet and all the things that you had in your list there, airplanes and cars and such. So they're already getting the benefit. They don't need an additional 20% to say that they've earned. They're here, they're using it anyway. And second, you talked just about, well, the corporations and the entrepreneurs and the big guys are getting all the benefit from this, and they should give up 80% or potentially 80%. You're saying, well, give them another 20, so they only give up 60% of their income. Aren't you nice? But in fact, all of their employees should only be making 20% or 40% of what they're making, because what they're getting out of it is, or what they're putting into it, is as a result of that same social cultural heritage. And so it's not just those guys at the top, it's everybody that benefits, and everybody's income that's, if you're right, is overinflated by 80%. So everybody should be cut by 80 or 60 since you're counting.
You're right, everybody does make use of this every day. You get on the road and you go to the theater. But that's why I was careful to point out that we're going to charge those people who are using it in the creation of commercial value. There's lots of other uses that are non-commercial. We'll just let those slide. But if you're creating commercial value, then you should pay for your use of society.
John, thanks for an excellent presentation. I think, though, we need to recognize that what you're proposing is truly radical. You can see that this, and I agree, there is this huge accumulation of knowledge and infrastructure and so on that everybody takes advantage of. But you are proposing a system that would totally change the system that created all this wealth. So I think we need to proceed very carefully before we take that jump. In fact, you're probably tilting at windmills if you look at the foreseeable future, because it ain't going to happen. We can't even address the wealth disparity by some simple measures like a higher tax rate for the very, very wealthy. That doesn't happen. We don't have Medicare for all. That doesn't happen. To think that we're going to have universal income in the foreseeable future, I think, is almost delusional. It's just not going to happen. Among other things, you have to have a national identity card with everybody fingerprinted, because the potential for fraud in this system you're proposing is immense. This just, I think, ain't going to happen, at least not in our lifetimes. But sometime in the future, maybe it will, but not right away.
Okay, David Downer.
So as I'm sitting here thinking about this, the first thing that popped into my mind was, do we have a pilot program where this is going on and is it working? And the first thing that came to my mind was, we have Native Americans. And aren't the Native Americans getting funding through all the casinos that were built? And if so, if that's the case, and you look at the reservations, there's poverty, there's drug addiction, the U.S. government is providing health
were immediately available to the colonial settlers. But my question is instead, suppose, okay, I'm on welfare or unemployment, and I want to go look for a job overseas, okay? So I buy an airplane ticket and go and start interviewing for jobs in other countries, and then they cut off my welfare or my unemployment. And so what really coming down to also is another example is if I were to marry a foreign national, what piece of this pie does she get? There needs to be international treaties about all of this. Otherwise, I think I'll take my money and go on cruises for the rest of my life.
Well,
Have a good time.
you get the basic income as a citizen, regardless of where you're working. So if you go overseas to work, you'll still get it, if you're a citizen. If your wife is not yet a citizen, sorry, you'll have to support her.
I appreciate your presentation. It's very useful for us now. But I always have a tendency to look at the future and look at humanity as to what we are made of in order to satisfy our needs. And I see two things that we have not addressed yet because they're not timely, but they will happen, and we need to be prepared. First of all, we are fearful, we are greedy, and we also feel that we need to be compensated otherwise. Now, we are, in what you describe, an internal economic system with good suggestion and a good operation. But we are not by ourselves in this world. And international trade will have a tremendous consequence in what we are trying to do domestically. In addition to that, we also are involved in technology. Science and technology will change our need economically because when we become mechanized, we don't have the same need nor the same value that we hold today. So these are the interesting things that, if you look in the future, are quite interesting for me, and I'm sure others.
Also, I have a small confession to make. The video we just watched made reference to 7 other videos. Unfortunately, this project was more ambitious than I anticipated. Only 4 of those 7 are currently available on YouTube. The other 3 are in process. So if you rush to YouTube to check out all 7 of these videos, please be a little patient with the last 3.
You put a lot of effort into preparing this video, and a lot of research went into it. And as I waited, and I thought, when are you going to bring Karl Marx forward? Now, the Communist Manifest, and they would say, you know, everyone will get what they need, and everyone will contribute what they can. Now, this is, of course, a theory coming out of the 19th century, and some experiments flip-flopped in the communist system. We know that about the Soviet Union. And prior to that, of course, the Mormons tried a few times also to have communities in southern Utah. And it didn't work either. One of the basic drives drove us humanity out of the Stone Age was we want to make things better because we have an incentive to do it. It makes things better for us. And that basic notion of humanity has not left us yet. We should never forget that drive, that humanity, that evolution out of the Stone Age, that we have AI now. We have the internet and so on. Therefore, I want to
great until the revolution comes and they take it from you.
The whole
You know, I think, in all fairness, John, you can do better than I. To say that there is a sense of dependence and wealth that results from living in a society that has characteristics that facilitate that is, one of the things that really shocked me. I'm a naive person, so I'm shocked easily. When Barack Obama made the casual, obvious comment that, you didn't get where you are just by your own effort. And there was this huge negative reaction. As though, yeah, everything I did. Bullshit. You have to be in a structure, a societal structure, that gives you the opportunity to exploit or use or benefit from that infrastructure, so that what you do is necessary but not sufficient, to use the old, mathematical term. So taking everything is not, I think, what John's talking about.
And also, I would say this, I don't believe this fits the definition of communism at all.
Right.
We are not taking something that somebody else has created and giving it to another person. We're letting everybody keep all of the 20% that their efforts are responsible for. The other 80% was the result of our societal heritage. It was created by the value-creating power of that heritage. And it was not the result of anybody's effort. So we're not taking something that belongs to somebody and giving it to somebody else. We're giving everybody an equal share of their rightful inheritance.
John, you talk about societal heritage or a natural birthright. There's no such thing as a birthright. The universe, the next person doesn't owe you and the rest of us anything. Anything. Individualism. Capitalism versus socialism. Can you explain what capitalism is? How do you think this whole country came about with capitalism? It wasn't created by socialism. It was created by individuals with the help of employees. And it seems to me some of those employees, in fact all of them, could have had part of their compensation invested in either the own company or invested overall. And that's a better way to get individual income. One last thing. What is the poverty level? 3 TVs, 5 TVs, 4 cars, 1 car? They'll always want more.
We already have things like welfare, especially for single parents with dependent children and unemployment compensation, but mainly things like welfare. So under your proposal, does welfare still exist? The type of welfare that we now give someone who has no substantial assets and no substantial income, they're entitled to that welfare? Or are we going to say, oh, now you have this universal basic income, so you are no longer qualified for this welfare? What do you propose?
I wouldn't put it quite that way. Say, now you have universal basic income, you no longer need the welfare. So yes, a lot of the welfare payments, and eventually, hopefully all, will go away.
What do you do with the people that invest in the stock market or any other kind of marketplace where they can work and make more money for themselves and for their employees? I mean, how do you tax that? How do you bring that out? Are people allowed to just keep what they made? Who makes those kind of decisions?
Well, people don't keep all they make even today under our tax system. But
They definitely do.
opportunity are those who should be rewarded for it, not those who choose not to take advantage of that opportunity. If anything, the fact that there is this heritage, as you describe it, should be an argument against a basic income that rewards those who choose not to use it.
Well,
To the extent.
this technological heritage,
You know, don't say that the brakes even out, because I'll refute that in a second.
I do not,
Okay.
imply that.
if I understand the point you're making, this technological heritage is really, in our figure, a potential. Potential is not realized until somebody uses it. But once you do use it, you get far more value than you would be getting if you were living 20,000 years ago and your only tool was a stone axe. That's the difference. I mean, you're not working any harder than that caveman did, but you're getting so much more for it.
Secondly, you ignore the person who chooses not to work at all, have earned anything. Find that again.
We've inherited it. Not by our effort. Inheritance is a legitimate way to make it.
But that's no reason to give it to someone who chooses not to use it. To give that advantage away to someone who chooses not to take advantage of that advantage.
He's going to use it by spending it on whatever he wants.
The issue of choice becomes one that's highly debatable.
I'd like to ask the audience in general, what do you think of this, the format of today's presentation? Is a video to your liking, or would you rather have an individual up front making the presentation?
I think your format was fine. I did agree with the fellow who said that it would be nice to have both sides presented in the same presentation. But the format was fine.
Okay.
Just a couple of comments. One, I noticed using your concepts, that using yourself as an example in your wonderful presentation, that you would be one of those who avoid no one, including yourself, because most of it was automated. You used YouTube video, and so you're an example of a perfected organization, company of one, that's able to, like Google, produce a lot of revenue. In your case, it's just volunteer donations, I guess, to the club. But Google's able to produce an extraordinary revenue with fewer people than used to be the case. Also, your reliance on societal inheritance as a reason for moving more closer to a universal basic income. One does not, to me, have to go to that type of ethical basis for it. One could understand the need for universal basic income by taking an extreme case, a bright person like you or me or Bo or other people in this room, by thinking really hard, come up with this machine based on artificial intelligence that produces all the goods and services of the world. Like Saturn initially was trying to produce automobiles with just 3 people, the manager of each shift, and robots knocked out the cars. Now consider what would happen in that extreme as we move to more and more productivity. The person who wakes up would wake up to a nightmare. Actually, the nightmare would consist of 2 things. There would be no one lined up outside the door to pay for the Saturn vehicles, by way of example, because he hasn't paid anyone any money, so there's no one to buy his product. So it has to that asymptote. The other consideration besides societal inheritance to justify it is consider the Glass Menagerie, that picture in the book, The Glass Menagerie, the play. Someone, really successful people, really loved going on safaris to Africa, where they were able to attract such rich people to go on this annual safari that they decided to build a glass menagerie. The Glass Menagerie was a very elegant restaurant with glass walls in the middle of the jungle. Unfortunately, they never considered the unintended consequence that some people see the extreme wealth two individuals and are starving outside the glass wall, the glass menagerie, they broke down the walls and ate the rich people for dinner. So we have two other reasons. Yes, we have two reasons other than the societal inheritance to justify basic income. It's good for the entrepreneur to realize that if he doesn't pay any people, he won't be able to sell his product. And secondly, he'd like a safe place to go home to that night where people aren't threatening to kill him.
Enough.
I have a question.
What?
I have a question.
Oh, I didn't know. He went on so long, I thought he'd use the whole thing.
It's a real quick question.
Thanks
What
for
would
your
be a
comments.
safeguard in your
like my
plan
comment?
for inflation? Because I would think if everyone gets a bump in income, the prices would just go up.
If inflation would destroy the plan, first off,
They will contribute to it.
Yeah.
I see what you mean.
first off, if we pay for the basic income by royalties or user fees that we receive from the manufacturers who are using our heritage, then we would be paying for it with existing money, so we wouldn't be engaging in deficit spending. And so we would not have inflation for that reason. And I rely on the competitive capital economy to keep inflation down for the other reasons. So I'm not concerned about inflation.
I think one of the problems with a universal basic income is that the incentive to work would be decreased. Some people would be just happy to not work if their basic needs have been met. Also, hey guys in the back. Also, the people who are entrepreneurs and who are generating. Hey. The people that are generating the production, if they had to pay this tax, you don't want to call it tax, but whatever that you want to call this, that they have to pay to fund the universal basic income, their incentives to generate those jobs and or production would be decreased to the degree that the decrease in incentive would cause them not to do it in some cases or to do it less. You would end up with smaller GDP, a smaller pie to divide everyone among everyone because of the fact that there's people not working because they don't have to and not developing new technology in the future because there isn't enough incentive.
But I thought long and hard about how do you incentivize people to, those few people who are the engines of our economy. How do you incentivize those people? And I think back to the 1950s and the 1960s when the average CEO made 25 times what the man on the factory floor made. Right. And in that environment, we had no shortage of people wanting to start companies. In fact, we had some of the best
are some people who would not work, who would choose not to work. I knew one young man who felt freedom meant that if you want to work, work. If you don't want to work, you shouldn't have to work, and the government should send you a check. So my question is, how many of those people exist? I would think you'd have to have some studies, or you'd have some idea as to what percentage of people would have that attitude that if I don't want to work, I shouldn't have to work, and they don't want to work ever. How many of those people exist?
But also, I would also ask, in a highly automated world, we may not need those people to work. So if they're getting this money by inheritance, it's none of our business what they do with it. And if we don't need them in the labor force, what have we lost?
Well, somebody has to work.
No. And at this point, that's true. But a lot of people in working in AI say at some point, essentially nobody will be working.
No, the AI solution is we switch to a 5-day work week, we can go to a 4-day work week, a 3-day work week, or whatever. We're not going to stick with some people working 40 hours a week and other people staying home all the time.
I'm just saying we won't need the labor force to be as large. We won't need everybody working. So
Yes, you would. If you have a 3-day work week, you're going to need more workers. And you've got a 2-day work. And why should I work 4 days a week when that guy is working no day? Better than I work 2 days a week and he has to work 2 days a week.
Well, you can choose to work, and you will not only get the basic income, you'll also get your salary from your job. You'll get more for working. If a guy sitting in his basement playing video games doesn't want the extra salary, that's his business.
Yeah. I think one of the, I'm still talking about, the idea that the movers and shakers and innovators are all of a sudden going to go away if you have some change in the distribution of wealth in the country is stupid. Like many of you, I've known some of these folks. They want to do stuff, and a lot of them, the money is the way they keep score. Okay? And no rearrangement is going to alter that for that segment of the population, as far as I'm concerned. Yes?
Yeah, I'll just mention one thing. The type of money you're talking about, that is, you mentioned $1,200 and some dollars that you would get per month. Nobody's going to live high on the hog on that. And if you decide to live at that low standard, which is poverty standard, basically, that's fine. But if you want to do some more things, you're going to have to find a job. You have to get that, work those hours, get paid. But at least you can get that basic income. This one book that I referenced talked, again, about some universal basic income. And what it does allow is more family time. If you're a worker, you don't have to work that overtime. You don't have to do, some other things, so you can spend more time with the family and do other things that you would like to do. So universal basic income is not going to make you a millionaire.
All sorts of things you can do in the community. Coach,
Exactly.
Make
Volunteer work.
Well, they have to reinstate the draft, okay, because the army that we have right now, the volunteer army, is mostly people who need the job, the money for working and the benefits. There's patriotism too, of course, but I think that most people say, oh, this is all the brown people who needed an opportunity.
Interesting one.
Well, since at present only about a third of the youth are physically fit and qualified for it, so it's true. Okay?
I do have a relative who joined the military because basically he wasn't capable of doing anything else, and they took him. But, of course, who knows, we may replace that for a person with a robot or person with a
All right. Thank you all. John, thank you very much.